The third question, which will be first addressed by Dr. Zacharias, is the problem of evil. How can the Christian God, who is claimed to be all good and all powerful, allow there to be evil in the world? And isn't there a contradiction implicit in claiming on the one hand that God is all powerful and all good, and on the other hand claiming that evil exists?
I think of all questions, this may be the most difficult one to deal with, and I have tried my best to approach this question from various angles, not just philosophical, which much has been written, but particularly the existential aspect of it. When you're looking for an answer to something as significant as this, let me just present to you three areas that I will look to in order to find satisfaction for myself. First, I stated these this afternoon. You're looking for logical consistency in whatever is presented. You're looking for empirical relevance here. You're looking for that which can be empirically tested. And certainly, you're looking for the existential relevance just as well. So that the logic of it, the empirical adequacy, and the experiential relevance, those three will be brought to bear upon the answer. Let me expand upon the question so that you can see its assumptions. It happened to me many years ago, in the early years when I was beginning to do such things as trying to defend the Christian faith in particularly hostile environments. And I was at the University of Nottingham in England, when a student did not wait for me to even finish my talk, and he leaped out of his seat and he said, there cannot be a God when there is so much of evil, so much of gratuitous evil. He was obviously agitated by it, and I understood how he felt. I remember walking through Auschwitz some years ago before the Cold War had thawed out, and I was asked to do some lectures in Warsaw in Poland. And my host, who was a medical doctor, asked me if I would like to go and visit Auschwitz before I left. I wasn't prepared for what I was going to see. I had seen Buchenwald in East Germany, but that was not a death camp, and it somehow did not stir up the same horror and the same unrest within you when you stood there. So I understood how this man felt. I understood fully the passion with which he felt it. There cannot be a God, he said, when there's so much evil, especially such gratuitous evil in this world. And I said, can we interact and can we do our best to talk about this without offending each other in the process, but dealing with this with importance, because it is important to you, sir, it is important to me. I don't want to check my brains out at the door either. I want to have an answer to it just as well. I said, but help me understand where you're coming from. When you say there is such a thing as evil, aren't you assuming there is such a thing as good? He paused and he said, yes, I'm assuming that. I said, when you say there is such a thing as good, aren't you assuming there's such a thing as a moral law on the basis of which to differentiate between good and evil? If you remember the famous debate between the Jesuit philosopher Frederick Copleston and Bertrand Russell, at one point Copleston had Russell pinned on this question. And he said, Mr. Russell, do you believe in right and wrong? Do you believe in good and bad? And Bertrand Russell said, yes, I do. He said, how do you differentiate between good and bad? And Russell said, the same way I differentiate between yellow and blue. Copleston said, wait a minute, you differentiate between yellow and blue by seeing, don't you? He said, yes. How then do you differentiate between right and wrong, good and bad? Russell shrugged his shoulders and said, on the basis of feeling, what else? Now, Copleston was a kind man and carried on the discussion, but somebody ought to have stopped and said, Mr. Russell, in some cultures they love their neighbors, in other cultures they eat them, both on the basis of feeling. Do you have any personal preference on the matter of feeling here? How can you decide such monumental issues of life on the basis of feeling? Whether something feels right or feels wrong. So here it is. When you say there's such a thing as evil, aren't you assuming that such a thing is good? Yes. When you say there's such a thing as good, aren't you assuming there's such a thing as a moral law on the basis of which to differentiate between good and evil? He says, I suppose so. I said, but when you assume there's such a thing as a moral law, you must posit a moral lawgiver. But that's whom you're trying to disprove and not prove. Because if there's no moral lawgiver, there's no moral law. If there's no moral law, there is no good. If there is no good, there is no evil. He paused and looked at me and said, what then am I asking you? Now, I knew what he was asking me. He knew what he was asking me. He was basically saying, help me to make some sense out of this. Are you cheating me some way by this sleight of the hand logic that you have brought in here? No, I wasn't cheating him, but I was just trying to explain to him that the very framing of the question raises a philosophical dilemma for the questioner as much as it does for the one trying to answer it. How do we resolve this? So logically, the question only intensifies the dilemma because the questioner has to assume a capacity or a law by which to differentiate between good and evil. So this then moves us to the empirical adequacy part of it, and that is this.